This podcast is sponsored by Communicate and Connect Counseling, where we have a team of therapists who provide individual, couples, and family therapy services, all tailored to meet the needs of military and veteran families. To learn more about our services, visit www.communicateandconnect.com. Welcome to the Communicate and Connect podcast for military relationships with your host, Elizabeth Polinsky, a military marriage counselor. If this is your first time listening to the Communicate and Connect podcast, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe to make sure you get all our future episodes. We also really want to know what it is you love about our podcast, and if for some reason you're not loving it, we want to know that too, because we're committed to providing the best quality content to help you improve your relationships. You're listening to episode 34, Dealing with Overwhelming Emotions with Jackie Schuld. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Communicate and Connect podcast. I'm really excited for this episode because today we're going to be talking about how to deal with overwhelming emotions. And we have a guest today, Jackie Schuld, who is an art therapist and a mental health counselor. And she has some interesting takes on how to work with emotions and how she teaches her clients to deal with emotions, and then how this could be helpful for military couples. So we'll just start off. And Jackie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. You nailed it with I'm an art therapist, and I specialize in individuals with overwhelming thoughts and emotions. So I do this all day long and really enjoy it. And I think the other relevant thing to, since this is a podcast for military couples, is that I'm a military brat. My family was in the Air Force. So
okay. Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Yeah, my family was Navy, so I also grew up that way. So yeah, so I figured we could just first start by talking about how emotions are related to marriage. Because I think for a lot of people who, I don't know, they read books or they listen to podcasts and they hear things like, okay, go on date nights, you use I statements, sort of like to talk about your finances, and all of that stuff is lovely. But like my own individual mental health and my own ability to deal with my emotions, I think is really relevant to how people can even navigate any of their discussions, how they deal with finances, like all of that stuff, I think is directly tied to how someone can deal with their emotions. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts about how dealing with your emotions impacts marriage or is related to marriage or anything like that.
I mean, it impacts all of our relationships because personal experiences shape how we feel in a moment. So, for instance, you might be talking with your spouse and they say something that you're like, oh, that makes me angry. And then you're stuck in that anger, and your spouse has no idea that then everything that you're just getting angrier and angrier. That's one example.
Yeah. So someone, like in a conversation, one of the people getting angry, then like, what do you do with those emotions? That would be one way that emotions could impact a relationship of some kind. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, a lot of times our emotions don't have much to do with the other person. I know that sounds strange, but for instance, in a conversation, you may start to feel angry because you feel the person isn't understanding you. And that might have more to do with your own history of not feeling heard and understood in your life. And so this person is playing into the life story without even realizing it.
Okay. I like that. Let me repeat that just so that way I'm keeping track of it in my mind. I have to repeat things a lot, so bear with me. Okay, so we all have these stories that we learn about ourselves and about other people from our life experiences. And then when I'm interacting with my partner, if I feel like they aren't understanding me, that might be, maybe they're not understanding me, but maybe it's more that something about what they're doing or saying is bringing up this painful story that has been a
Right.
theme or a pattern in my life.
It's like resonating on a visceral level, like, oh, this doesn't feel, no, they're not understanding.
So I could see how would happen for pretty much any relationship. Like, I was just thinking, I'm sure I have stories from work environments too, not just marriage type stories, but ways that my like different careers or things that have happened in my careers where it could show up with my boss or with a friend or something like that. So, but we are talking about couples on our podcast. So I'll try to gear back towards that. So I tend to think that this is probably really important for military couples. Obviously, any couple would benefit from trying to work on how do I work through overwhelming emotions. But military couples really do face a lot of unique challenges, which I know you are aware, being Air Force, right? Air Force brat.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So I'm sure you got exposed to a lot of the similar things like constant or frequent moves, long distance deployments, all of that type of thing. And
so just lack of control.
Yeah.
All those things you just mentioned, that's outside of the family's control.
Yes. Yeah. Which is a big emotional thing.
Yeah.
To feel like I'm out of control, I have no control in my life that can be a pretty overwhelming emotion as well. Yeah. Yeah. Which is something that not all, civilian couples don't have to go through or deal with. Not that they never feel out of control or like they don't have control in life, but the frequency of having things happen that they have no control over.
Right. Or like, I'm not going to move there. No, not doing it.
Yes.
Like they have that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, a lot of other difficult emotions come up with that, right? Like sadness, anger, like you were mentioning earlier, probably anxiety. Yeah, I was just thinking like there could be a lot of different types of overwhelming emotions that come up for people. And then the frequency of it, I think, is higher for military couples because now you're going to deploy. And so now I have anxiety about the fact that you're going to deploy, and then you deploy. And now I have all of this sadness and loneliness, and then you're going to come back, and now I feel anxious about the fact that you're coming back, and you're coming back, and now we're going to move.
Right. And like my view of emotions is based on needs are beneath. Like, for instance, we have a need for safety, we have a need for understanding, we have a need for connection. And so in a military life, those needs are constantly shifting. That when your spouse is deployed, you have to meet a lot of your needs. And then they come back and that spouse wants to meet those needs. And it's a shift.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about this idea of needs being underneath emotions, because I don't think I've ever talked about that on this podcast before. So explain that a little bit for the audience. Like, what do you mean when you say there are needs underneath emotions?
Okay. This is based on Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. It's a framework he developed, which he explains that when we have a feeling such as happiness, joy, anger, sadness, underneath it is a need in our life. So it's basically something we value, like I mentioned, safety, understanding, connection were the one wave. So for instance, if you're feeling happy, it's because your need for connection or adventure was met. You're like, ooh, you like went somewhere, did something fun. Or if you're feeling angry, maybe you value your need for justice was not met, or your need for being listened to was not met, or your need for being understood was not met. So by going down, we can kind of dig beneath, like, hey, I'm feeling this way. That need is not being met here.
Mm. Okay. And so you said this comes from nonviolent communication, which is
Yes.
it's like a technique or a theory about communication. What is it?
Yeah, it's a theory developed by Rosenberg, and also he has a great book, Nonviolent Communication, and he also gives techniques in it. So
okay. So he developed this theory, and he also provides techniques in the book.
Yes.
And the book is called Nonviolent Communication.
Yes.
Okay. And so in this theory, the reason that people have emotions is because I have a need and it's either not getting met or it is getting met. Like if it is getting met, I have a positive emotion. And then if it's not getting met, I have a more challenging emotion.
Yeah. I think that is a good explanation in its simplest form, though I want to acknowledge we're complex beings, and usually there's multiple feelings and multiple needs. It's layered.
Yeah. So I could have more than one need and more than one feeling at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. When you work with your clients on nonviolent communication and dealing with their overwhelming emotions, can you take us through kind of some of the steps that you use to help clients deal with overwhelming emotions?
Yes. For me as an art therapist, one of the first things is giving permission to actually feel their emotions. A lot of times we, hold them at arm's length, or we don't want to go there because we think we'll cry. And so how can we possibly understand what's beneath them if we're not even allowing emotions in the first place? And so as an art therapist, I a lot of times we'll do like a messy painting or like something to get all the emotions out and honor that they're present. I get not everyone works with an art therapist, but that can be done through, talking to someone, journaling. There's many methods.
Okay. So getting the emotions out. So like the first step is to let yourself feel your feelings, and that could get them out either by talking or by expressing them through art in some way.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And then what do you do? What happens next?
So then once you see what you're dealing with, then you can, I usually start with the emotion that's most charged. For instance, let's say anger. And we'll look at, okay, what needs were not being met in this moment that created this anger? So I keep using the example of understanding because that is what I hear most often. Individuals talking about their partnerships. They're like, they didn't understand me.
Yeah.
So, or they didn't hear me, like if their partner cut them off or didn't give them enough space. So that's another need, is being fully heard, being understood. So we kind of get to that level.
Okay. So step one is to feel my feelings and express them in some way. And then step two is to look for, look at, this is the incident or the event. This is what happened that made me feel my emotion. And then and then the next step is, what were my needs that didn't get met, and that's the reason why I'm feeling this way.
Right. And I think it might be good if I provided another example that doesn't involve an argument, because for instance, a partner might be feeling some resentment, exhaustion, things like that. And getting at that, they have a need for equality in their marriage, for support. And so kind of identifying, I'm doing most of the things in the home right now. Our marriage is not equal right now, and I don't feel I have support. And that's why I'm feeling this exhausted and resentful.
Yeah. I can give another example from my personal life, if that works. Just, I just because I was thinking about this, because it's also not a fight. Like my husband and I are not fighting about this. And you're right. It is easy to think about, okay, what was I don't know if it's easy, but it's easier to go to, okay, what was the fight and what was my unmet need in the fight? But I might have emotions that are not related to a fight that are also
Right.
somehow an unmet need. And so like I really want to go with my friends. I do a social dance called Kizomba, which is an African dance that I'm like
Mhm.
super into right now. And
Mhm.
it's so much fun. But my friends are going to Angola, Africa next year to go spend 2 weeks and just go dancing. And so
Ooh.
I really want to go. And this is like my need for fun, maybe. I mean,
Yes,
I don't know the need.
exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. My need for fun, my need for adventure.
Mhm.
I don't really know what dancing, what need that meets.
Expression.
Expression, maybe. Yeah. Okay.
Movement is a need.
Okay. Yeah. So not knowing the types of needs that are available for me to pull from nonviolent communication is making this example hard for me. But that would be an example where I have a need that now we have to like negotiate that in our relationship. Like, are you going to be cool if I just go to Africa for 2 weeks to go dancing?
Yes.
So okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that would be an example that could be something very different than a fight, but still I have an emotion and that's connected to my needs.
Yes.
Okay.
And to your point, online there are plenty, if you type in nonviolent communication needs, there are plenty of lists online of all the different needs. And I usually have them printed to have in person with my clients so we can reference them and kind of jog their like, oh yeah, it's this kind of a thing.
Okay. So I will make sure to maybe you and I can get together and find like what a good list would be. And we can include that list in the show notes for this episode. So that way people could go look and see like what are all these needs that people have that are often underlying their emotions. But maybe would you mind just like, I don't know, listing off some that come to the top of your head?
So there's around just your physical environment. So, we have for shelter, protection, safety, nourishment. So there's basic physical needs. And then there's community needs, which are understanding, being seen, being heard. And then there's even our own, I think of them as spiritual needs, which is like solitude is a need, or rest is a need. So there's kind of different categories that help break it down to make it a little more digestible.
Yeah. When you said solitude, that really stuck out to me because I was thinking like, so often someone in a couple is more introverted, right? One of the two people is the more introverted one who needs more alone time or time to just be in their thoughts or something. And I was just thinking like, I can see that being a need that someone would have that isn't a need that I would have thought of being a need. I would never have thought like, oh, I need solitude, or oh, my partner needs solitude. Like that's not something that would have naturally come to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yet that could be a big fight in a relationship where, someone's needing solitude, the other person's feeling like, why am I not good enough for you? Why you don't want to spend time with me? Like, what's wrong with me? Like it can quickly escalate.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because you have a need for solitude and I have a need for connection.
Yes.
And then how do we navigate that we have these two needs? Let me recap here. We have sort of like step one is notice your feelings, let yourself have them, express them in some way, sort of to yourself, like through art or journaling or talking them out or something. And then we have thinking about, okay, what was the situation that made me feel this way? And then what was my unmet need in the situation that brought up my emotion?
Yes.
And then do you have any thoughts about what you do once you have identified the unmet need?
That depends on the situation. A lot of times with couples, the goal is to be able to return to your partner and express those things. To say, hey, when this happened, I was feeling this way because I was needing this. And then to be very specific, like have a specific request for the individual.
Okay. So think about my need. I can share it with my partner, and I could also make a request of them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Could you give us an example of how that might, I don't know if there's a common example with the couples that you work with, but.
Yes. There's an example of, say you're upset because when your partner comes home, they immediately want to just sit on the couch and watch TV. And meanwhile, you have been home with the children and attending to the house, and you have a need for solitude and rest and a break. And so there's this, resentment builds up because you have this unmet need. So what you would do is as specifically as you can without using judgments, you would say to your partner, like, hey, when you come home and go directly to the television, I'm feeling exhausted and tired and lonely and angry in those moments because I am needing rest and some solitude and for my efforts to be seen. And so you're really trying to take it on yourself and not say, you're not seeing me, you're not giving me rest. It's kind of trying to create a neutral ground.
Okay. I'm sorry, maybe I missed it. You said, I have a need for rest and to be seen. Yeah. And then is that the request, or do I do something else as a request?
Saying that, because you're right. That's broad, that like someone's interpretation of how to give you rest. Like I'd be like, okay, go in the bathroom for 5 minutes. Is that enough? Like, yeah, they don't know. So you need to provide something specific, concrete, as would be possible for 3 days a week. When you home, you take over entertaining the kids, and I can go to the bedroom for a half an hour by myself.
Okay. Like this is the exact outcome that I want. That's what I would want to include in the request.
Yes.
Okay.
And in more complicated situations, you can acknowledge, like, I'm not sure how to fix this. Can we talk about it?
Okay. So then in that case, my request would be, can we talk about it? If I don't have something, if I don't have like a specific outcome that I'm, I guess, requesting of my partner, it could be, I would like us to talk about it more. Talking about
can we brainstorm ways to have your needs met and my needs met?
I like that idea. Can we brainstorm together? That's very like team. That feels very team-like, which I think I like that solution there. So we've covered a lot of ground. If you had to say like 2 tips for military couples when dealing with overwhelming emotions, maybe nonviolent communication, what would be your top 2 tips for couples when they're feeling overwhelming feelings?
Given our conversation, I have a fresh tip in that sometimes you're going to have unmet needs that your partner cannot meet. For instance, if you're home and exhausted and your partner's deployed, partner cannot meet that need of the challenges of home. So sometimes what it takes is brainstorming other ways to get those needs met. So that's one tip to throw in there.
Okay. So because that's really relevant, right? Especially for military couples, because there are a lot of times that my partner can't meet my needs because they're meeting the needs of the military. So,
yes.
Okay. So then you're saying I can still like let myself feel those feelings, express them, identify my unmet needs, but then I might have to brainstorm on my own. How else can I get those needs met?
Right. Like for instance, maybe you're really needing connection, like you're missing your spouse but they're not there. And so maybe you decide to join a group or make a regular coffee date with a friend. You find a different way to get connection.
I like that tip. That feels really needed. Any other tips? Any other tips or last, thoughts?
Yes.
Okay.
I will say if you are wading into this territory with your partner, you're like, I want to talk about what happened, the feelings and needs. You can so easily derail it if you start with judgments, meaning, hey, when you were super crappy to me the other day, I was feeling angry. The minute you say like when you're being crappy, usually it's strong language, but like want to just start as neutral as possible, being like, hey, when we yesterday, don't hit on any inflammatory language.
Okay. So don't just start criticizing my partner as I start the conversation.
Right. Because they'll be in a space to listen. They'll be in a defensive space.
Yeah. So the way to do that is to remove judgment from from how I'm talking about it. Do you have any tips on how to remove judgment from when I bring this up, especially if I am angry? How do I go about removing the judgment from what I'm saying?
I would suggest practicing it in that you're trying to just give observations without anything that's involving your assessment of the situation. So leave out the assessment. More just like, hey, we had a talk, or when you came home and sat on the couch. Like,
okay, when you came home and sat on the couch, that is fair game. That's just a fact. Versus if I said, when you came home and were lazy and didn't do anything to help me, that would be the judgment part.
Or like another judgment I hear a lot is like, when you always come home, and like, that's another judgment of like always, the extremes of like always, never, like ironically, that is never the case. There's always exceptions.
Okay. This is giving me an idea. I think at some point on this podcast, we should probably do an episode on judgment. Like, what is judgment and how do you get rid of judgment? How do you remove that from your language type of stuff? But what I'm hearing is stick with the facts and leave out any opinions or assessments or evaluations of what I think the facts mean.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jackie, I've really loved having you on this podcast. Could you tell us, like, if somebody wanted to learn more about art therapy, or they wanted to learn more about nonviolent communication, or they wanted to work with you, could you tell everybody like how they could learn more or work with you?
The best way to reach me is through my website, which is www.jackieschuld.com. I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes.
And on there, I have a whole section on resources about all of these topics, as well as I have a blog I write daily on these topics. And so they're resources in themselves.
Okay, great. So there are a lot of educational resources on your website. And then the website is also a way that people could learn more about working with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, we will definitely have that in the show notes for this episode. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please take a second to go rate, review, and subscribe so you get all of our future episodes. Make sure to check out the show notes to sign up for our free 10-week relationship email course. This email course is really designed for people who are maybe having trouble with communication or connection in their relationship, and helping them develop some quick wins right away to start improving it. While I am a therapist, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered therapy. And it should also not be a replacement for therapy. If you think you need a professional of any kind, you should definitely go find one. Until next time.